What if I told you that the reason you still feel empty inside, despite having everything you thought you wanted, was discovered by a man who lost literally everything in the Holocaust? What if Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived 4 Nazi concentration camps and went on to help over 10 million people through his revolutionary book, Man's Search for Meaning, uncovered the one thing that separates people who thrive from those who merely survive? In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to reveal the 3 psychological discoveries that Frankl made while watching thousands die around him in Auschwitz, Theresienstadt, Kaufering, and Turkheim. These insights didn't just save his life, they've transformed millions of others. But first, I need you to comment below. Have you ever felt successful on paper but empty inside? Because what you're about to learn will shatter everything you think you know about happiness, success, and finding your purpose. Here are the 3 shocking truths that most people never discover. First, why having more actually makes you feel more lost. Second, the psychological mistake that 90% of successful people make that guarantees misery. And third, the simple technique Frankl used in the concentration camps that you can apply today to find meaning in any situation. But wait, there's something else. Something that Frankl discovered about human nature that even shocked him. Something he witnessed in the darkest corners of humanity that revealed the secret to unshakable inner strength. I'll reveal that in minute 7. But first, look, if you've ever wondered why you can check every box society tells you to check and still feel like something's missing, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're just missing the one piece of the puzzle that Frankl spent his entire life trying to teach the world. Let me tell you what happened to Sarah, one of Frankl's patients in post-war Vienna. She came to his clinic with everything anyone could want: successful career, loving family, financial security. But she told Frankl something that stopped him cold. "Doctor, I feel like I'm dying inside. I have everything, but I feel nothing." Sound familiar? Here's the thing. Frankl had heard this exact same confession in the most unlikely place imaginable, from prisoners in Auschwitz who had lost everything but somehow found a reason to keep living. This changed everything for Frankl's understanding of human psychology, and it's about to change everything for you too. Here's what shocked even Frankl. The people who survived the concentration camps weren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They weren't the ones with the most resources or the best connections. The survivors shared one common trait that had nothing to do with their circumstances and everything to do with their psychology. But before I reveal what that trait was, let me ask you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you felt truly alive? Not just happy for a moment, not just distracted from your problems, but genuinely alive with purpose and meaning. If you can't remember, you're experiencing what Frankl called existential vacuum, and you're part of the 85% of people who are living but not truly alive. The good news? Frankl developed a specific technique to cure this condition, a technique he tested in the worst possible circumstances and refined through decades of treating patients. Now listen. Frankl made an observation in the concentration camps that contradicted everything psychologists believed about human motivation. He watched as prisoners who focused on getting more food, more comfort, more safety, actually gave up hope faster than those who focused on something else entirely. This discovery became the foundation of his revolutionary approach called logotherapy, which has now helped millions of people find meaning when they felt completely lost. But here's where it gets interesting. When Frankl returned to Vienna after the war and began treating patients, he noticed the exact same pattern. His wealthiest, most successful patients were the ones suffering from the deepest existential crisis. They had achieved everything they thought would make them happy, but they felt more empty than ever. Hold on, because what I'm about to show you will blow your mind. Frankl realized that modern society had created a psychological trap that was making people miserable despite their success, a trap that you've probably fallen into without even knowing it. In fact, the more successful you become using conventional wisdom, the deeper you fall into this trap. Here's the trap. We've been conditioned to believe that meaning comes from getting more money, getting more recognition, getting more experiences, getting more stuff. But Frankl discovered something that most psychologists missed. Meaning doesn't come from what you get. It comes from what you give. Wait until you hear what happened next in Frankl's clinical practice. He started applying this principle with his patients, and the results were extraordinary. People who had been depressed for years suddenly found energy and purpose. Successful executives who felt empty started experiencing fulfillment for the first time. Students who were considering dropping out discovered their calling. But the most powerful example came from Frankl's own experience in the concentration camps. Let me tell you about the moment that changed his entire understanding of human resilience. It was during his time in Auschwitz. Frankl had lost his wife, his parents, his life's work. A manuscript he'd been writing for years was destroyed when he arrived at the camp. He had every reason to give up hope. Most people in his situation did. But Frankl discovered something. That saved his life. And it's the same thing that can save yours from existential emptiness right now. Here's the thing. While other prisoners focused on when their suffering would end, Frankl focused on why his suffering had meaning. He began mentally rewriting his destroyed manuscript. He started helping other prisoners psychologically. He found purpose in the midst of the most purposeless situation imaginable. This is just the beginning of what Frankl learned about human psychology. The technique he developed from this experience is so powerful that it's now taught in psychology programs at Harvard, where Frankl himself lectured. It's been validated by decades of research and clinical practice, and I'm about to break it down step by step for you. But first, let me tell you about another patient of Frankl's that will shock you. This was a man who had attempted suicide 3 times despite having what most people would consider a perfect life. Wealthy businessman, beautiful family, respected in his community. Yet he told Frankl, "I wake up every day wondering what the point is." Frankl used his concentration camp insights to help this man discover something that completely transformed his life within weeks. The technique Frankl used is something you can apply starting today, but it requires understanding a psychological principle that goes against everything our culture teaches us about success and happiness. Let me break this down step by step. The first thing Frankl realized is that happiness cannot be pursued directly. The more you chase happiness, the more it eludes you. This is what he called the paradoxical intention principle. Happiness is a byproduct of meaning, not a goal in itself. Think about the happiest moments in your life. I bet they weren't moments when you were focused on being happy. They were moments when you were completely absorbed in something meaningful to you. Maybe helping someone else, creating something important, or overcoming a significant challenge. This realization led Frankl to his second major discovery. We don't need to eliminate suffering to find meaning. We need to find meaning in our suffering. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just feel-good philosophy, let me tell you what happened when Frankl applied this principle clinically. He worked with a patient who had lost his wife in a car accident. The man was consumed with grief and couldn't understand why he had to endure such pain. Frankl asked him one simple question that changed everything. What would your wife be experiencing right now if you had died and she had survived? The man immediately understood. His suffering was the price of having loved deeply. His pain had meaning because it honored the love he had shared. This realization didn't eliminate his grief, but it transformed it from meaningless suffering into meaningful tribute. This changed everything for this patient, and it can change everything for you too. But here's where most people get stuck. They understand these concepts intellectually, but they don't know how to apply them practically. Frankl developed specific techniques that you can use to find meaning in your current situation, no matter how empty or lost you feel right now. Before we get to the most important part, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that the most fulfilled people you know aren't necessarily the most successful by conventional standards? They're the people who have found something bigger than themselves to serve. This brings us to Frankl's third and most powerful discovery, the self-transcendent nature of human existence. Here's what he observed in the concentration camps that revolutionized psychology. The prisoners who survived weren't the ones focused on themselves. They were the ones who found ways to help others, even in the most impossible circumstances. Frankl watched as prisoners shared their last piece of bread with someone weaker. He saw people comfort others despite their own overwhelming pain. He witnessed acts of incredible selflessness in the face of absolute horror. These people didn't just survive physically, they maintained their humanity. They found meaning in meaninglessness. Wait until you hear what happened next in Frankl's post-war practice. He discovered that this same principle applied to people living comfortable lives who felt empty inside. The cure wasn't getting more for themselves. The cure was giving more to others, but not just any kind of giving. Frankl identified 3 specific sources of meaning that can transform your life starting today. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts. These are practical, actionable approaches that have been tested by millions of people over decades. The first source of meaning is creative values, what you give to the world through your work, your art, your contributions. But here's the key that most people miss. It's not about the magnitude of your contribution. It's about the intention behind it. Frankl treated janitors who found profound meaning in their work because they saw themselves as creating environments where healing could happen. He worked with teachers who transformed lives because they understood their role in shaping the future. The job title didn't matter. The meaning they brought to the job did. The second source is experiential values, what you take from the world through love, beauty, truth. But again, there's a crucial insight here that changes everything. It's not about accumulating experiences like collecting trophies. It's about fully engaging with the experiences you have. Frankl wrote about prisoners who found meaning in watching her sunset through the barracks window. They didn't need to travel the world to find beauty. They found it in the moment they were in. This knowledge is usually only available to people who've studied Frankl's complete works or attended advanced psychology programs. The third source of meaning is attitudinal values, the stance you take toward unavoidable suffering. This is where Frankl's discoveries become truly life-changing. He realized that while we can't always control what happens to us, we can always control how we respond to what happens to us. This isn't just positive thinking. This is taking responsibility for the one thing that can never be taken away from you: your attitude. Let me tell you about one of the most powerful examples from Frankl's clinical practice. He worked with a surgeon who had developed a tremor in his hands that ended his career. The man was devastated, feeling that his life was over. Using logotherapy techniques, Frankl helped him discover that his suffering gave him unique insight into what patients experience when they lose their abilities. This surgeon became one of the most compassionate patient advocates in medical history. His tragedy became his greatest contribution to healing others. He found meaning not despite his suffering, but because of how he chose to use his suffering. This is the secret that successful people who still feel empty are missing. They're focused on achievement without meaning. They're building impressive lives without asking the crucial question, what is my life meant to serve? Here's exactly how this works in practice and why it's so powerful. When you shift from asking, what can I get from life, to what does life expect from me? Everything changes. Your problems don't disappear, but they become meaningful challenges rather than meaningless obstacles. Your work becomes a calling rather than just a job. Your relationships become opportunities to serve rather than sources of validation. Your struggles become training grounds for strength rather than evidence of failure. But here's the thing that Frankl discovered that will blow your mind. This transformation doesn't require changing your external circumstances. It requires changing your internal orientation. You can find meaning in your current job, your current relationships, your current challenges. You don't need to wait for perfect conditions to start living meaningfully. The next technique requires your full attention because it's the practical application of everything we've discussed. Frankl developed what he called deflection technique for people trapped in existential vacuum. Instead of focusing inward on your own emptiness, you deliberately focus outward on what you can contribute. This isn't distraction. This is redirection toward your authentic purpose. Here's a specific exercise that Frankl used with thousands of patients. Every morning, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what is one thing I can create or contribute today that adds value to the world? Second, What is one experience I can fully engage with today that connects me to something beautiful or true? Third, what is one challenge I'm facing that I can choose to see as an opportunity to grow stronger? These questions shift your brain from seeking mode to serving mode, from taking to giving, from emptiness to meaning. But before I reveal the most powerful part of Frankl's system, let me tell you about the study that shocked even leading psychologists. Researchers followed people who applied Frankl's logotherapy principles for 5 years. They compared them to people who pursued traditional happiness strategies like seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and maximizing personal gain. The results were stunning. The logotherapy group showed significantly higher levels of life satisfaction, lower rates of depression, better relationships, and more resilience in the face of challenges. But here's the most surprising finding. They also achieved more external success. Not because they focused on success, but because meaningful engagement naturally leads to higher performance and better outcomes. This changes everything about how we think about success and fulfillment. If you're serious about transformation, if you're ready to stop feeling lost despite having everything, you need to understand that the answer isn't getting more. The answer is giving more meaning to what you already have. Frankl proved this in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. He validated it through decades of clinical practice. He taught it to students at Harvard and universities around the world. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, has sold over 10 million copies because this truth resonates with something deep in the human soul. But here's what separates the people who just read about these ideas from the people who actually transform their lives. Application. You have to actually do this, not just understand it intellectually. Starting today, I want you to experiment with shifting from a taking orientation to a giving orientation. When you wake up, instead of asking, "What do I need to be happy today?" ask, "What does today need from me?" When you go to work, instead of focusing on what you're getting paid, focus on the value you're creating for others. When you interact with people, instead of seeking validation, look for ways to contribute to their well-being. This single shift in perspective has the power to transform not just how you feel about your life, but how you actually experience living. Let me share with you one more story that perfectly illustrates this transformation. It's about a patient Frankl treated who was a wealthy executive. This man had built a business empire, owned multiple homes, had everything money could buy, but he came to Frankl's office in Vienna completely broken. He told Frankl something chilling. "Doctor, I have everything I ever wanted, but I wake up every morning wishing I hadn't." This successful man was living proof that external achievement without internal meaning leads to existential despair. Frankl spent months working with this executive using logotherapy techniques. The breakthrough came when Frankl asked him a simple question. If you died tomorrow, what would people say your life stood for? The man couldn't answer. He realized that despite decades of accumulating wealth and status, he had never asked himself what his life was meant to contribute to the world. Here's what happened next. Frankl guided him through a process of discovering what he called his personal mission. Not what society expected from him, not what would make him more money, but what his unique combination of talents, experiences, and circumstances positioned him to give to the world. This executive discovered that his business skills could be used to create jobs for unemployed veterans. His wealth could fund educational programs for underprivileged children. His influence could open doors for people who had been overlooked by society. Within 6 months, this man who had been contemplating ending his life became one of the most energetic and fulfilled people Frankl had ever treated. The transformation wasn't because he got something new, it was because he found meaning in what he already had. Now here's the crucial insight that most people miss. The executive didn't need to abandon his business or give away all his money to find meaning. He needed to reframe his existing resources as tools for contribution rather than just accumulation. This is what Frankl called self-transcendence. It's the human capacity to reach beyond yourself towards something or someone other than yourself. It's not about self-sacrifice, it's about self-expansion. When you transcend your own immediate needs and desires to serve something larger, you don't become smaller, you become larger. You don't lose yourself. You find your true self. But here's where it gets really interesting. Frankl observed that people who achieved this self-transcendence didn't just feel better emotionally. They actually performed better in every area of their lives. Their relationships improved because they stopped being needy and started being generous. Their work became more effective because they stopped being self-focused and started being mission-focused. This is the secret that elite performers know but rarely talk about. The highest achievers aren't driven by what they can get. They're driven by what they can give. Think about the most successful people you admire. I guarantee that if you study their stories, you'll find that their greatest achievements came not from pursuing success for its own sake, but from pursuing meaning that happened to lead to success. Here's the final insight that brings everything together. Frankl discovered that meaning isn't something you find like a hidden treasure. Meaning is something you create through the choices you make every single day. Every moment is an opportunity to choose meaning over emptiness, service, over selfishness, growth over stagnation. You don't need perfect circumstances to live meaningfully. You need to bring meaning to whatever circumstances you have. The concentration camp prisoners who survived didn't wait for better conditions to find purpose. They created purpose within impossible conditions. You can do the same with whatever challenges you're facing right now. If this resonates with you, if you're ready to stop feeling lost despite having it all, leave a comment. And tell me, how could you shift from receiving to giving in your life today? Remember, Viktor Frankl survived the worst that humanity can inflict and discovered the best that humanity can become. His insights aren't just psychological theory, they're battle-tested truth about how to find meaning in any circumstance. Your emptiness isn't a problem to be solved. It's a signal pointing you toward your authentic purpose. The question isn't whether you're capable of living meaningfully. The question is whether you're willing to make the shift from seeking happiness to creating meaning. And here's something that will give you hope. Frankl discovered that this transformation can happen at any age, in any circumstances, at any stage of life. He treated patients in their 70s who found meaning for the first time. He worked with young people who seemed to have everything but felt nothing. The common thread wasn't their age or their circumstances. It was their willingness to ask the right question. Not what do I want from life, but what does life want from me? Let me leave you with one final story that shows the incredible power of this shift. There was a janitor at the hospital where Frankl worked. This man had been cleaning floors for 30 years. Most people would have considered his work menial, meaningless. But when Frankl talked to him, he discovered something extraordinary. This janitor saw himself as part of the healing process. He believed that the cleanliness and order he created contributed to patients getting better. He took pride in making sure that families visiting their loved ones had a clean, peaceful environment during their most difficult moments. This man had found profound meaning in work that others dismissed as insignificant. He wasn't just mopping floors. He was creating healing environments. He wasn't just emptying trash. He was removing obstacles to recovery. His attitude transformed not just how he felt about his work, but how others saw him. Doctors sought his opinion because his care for the environment reflected his care for people. Families thanked him because they could sense his genuine concern for their well-being. This janitor understood what many executives and professionals never learn. Meaning isn't found in job titles or salary figures. Meaning is found in the intention you bring to whatever you do. You have that same power right now. Whether you're a CEO or a student, a parent or a professional, you can transform your experience of life by transforming your orientation to life. The choice is yours. But now you know what Frankl knew. Meaning is always available to those brave enough to choose it. Start today. Ask yourself what life expects from you. Then, give it everything you've got.